Chapter 1. The Mysterious Invitation. Hercule Poirot sat in his immaculate London apartment, the morning light filtering through the heavy curtains, casting a soft glow on the polished mahogany table. His breakfast tray, arranged with geometric precision, held a single cup of steaming chocolate and a perfectly buttered brioche. The great detective's moustache twitched as he reached for the morning's correspondence, delivered by his ever-efficient valet, Georges. Among the usual letters, invitations to speak at society gatherings, requests for consultations, and the occasional fan letter from an admirer of his exploits, was an envelope that stood out. It was of heavy cream paper, sealed with a crimson wax stamp bearing the crest of a stag entwined with ivy. Poirot's keen eyes narrowed. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "this is no ordinary missive." He sliced the seal with a silver letter opener, his movements deliberate, as if dissecting a clue. The letter inside was penned in elegant looping script, and Poirot's lips pursed as he read, "My dear Monsieur Poirot, your reputation as a solver of mysteries precedes you, and it is with great urgency that I request your presence at Blackwood Manor this coming weekend. A matter of utmost delicacy has arisen, one that requires your unparalleled intellect. I cannot divulge details in writing, but rest assured the stakes are high, and the shadows of the past loom large. A car will collect you at precisely 10 a.m. on Friday. I implore you to accept. Yours sincerely, Lord Reginald Harrington Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Blackwood Manor was not unknown to him, not by name at least. It was a grand estate in the misty hills of Sussex, whispered about in society circles for its Gothic splendour, and a history steeped in tragedy. Lord Harrington, the current master, was a reclusive figure, a widower whose wealth stemmed from colonial trade, and whose family name carried both prestige and whispers of scandal. But what piqued Poirot's curiosity was the letter's tone, formal yet cryptic, with an undercurrent of fear. "Les ombres du passé," Poirot repeated softly, savouring the phrase. The shadows of the past. What could they mean? He summoned Georges, who appeared with the silent efficiency of a well-oiled machine. "Georges, my good man, what do you know of Blackwood Manor?" Poirot asked, holding the letter aloft. Georges, ever discreet, tilted his head slightly. "A fine estate, sir, though not without its stories. They say it's haunted, sir. Something about a butler who disappeared under mysterious circumstances some 50 years ago. The locals avoid it after dark." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A haunted manor, huh? And now a lord in distress. This is most intriguing." He tapped the letter against the table. "Prepare my valise, George. We shall accept Lord Harrington's invitation." Friday morning arrived with a drizzle that cloaked London in a grey veil. At precisely 10 a.m., a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up outside Poirot's apartment. The driver, a taciturn man with a scar across his cheek, introduced himself as Baxter and opened the door with a curt nod. Poirot, dressed in a tailored overcoat and carrying his silver-topped cane, stepped into the car, his mind already turning over possibilities. The journey to Sussex was smooth but silent, the countryside rolling by in a blur of hedgerows and mist. Poirot's thoughts were not on the scenery, but on the letter's vagueness. Why had Lord Harrington not specified the nature of the problem? Was it theft, blackmail, or something darker? As the car wound up a gravel drive, Blackwood Manor loomed into view. It was a sprawling edifice of weathered stone, its towers piercing the fog like sentinels. Ivy clung to the walls, and the windows glinted like watchful eyes. Poirot noted the air of neglect, Cracked gargoyles perched above the entrance, and the lawn, though manicured, seemed to sag under an invisible weight. The car stopped, and Baxter ushered Poirot to the grand oak doors, which creaked open to reveal a cavernous hall. Lord Reginald Harrington awaited him. A tall man in his 60s with silver hair and a face etched with worry. His handshake was firm but brief, and his eyes darted nervously toward the shadowed corners of the room. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot thank you enough for coming," he said, his voice low. "This is no ordinary matter, I assure you." Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur, I am at your service. But pray, tell me, what is this matter of delicacy that brings Hercule Poirot to your door?" Harrington hesitated, glancing at the servants hovering nearby. A young maid with wide eyes and an older butler whose stiff posture betrayed unease. "Not here," he said at last. "Join us for tea in the drawing-room, and I shall introduce you to the others. Then, perhaps, we can speak more freely." The drawing-room was a study in opulence, with velvet drapes, a roaring fire, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors glaring from the walls. Poirot's sharp eyes catalogued the guests as they were introduced. There was Lady Beatrice, Harrington's niece, a sharp-tongued heiress with a penchant for pearls and a calculating smile. Next, Mr. Charles Vaughan, a solicitor with ink-stained fingers and a nervous laugh, who seemed overly interested in the Manor's finances. Miss Clara Henshaw, the housekeeper, was a wiry woman with a habit of wringing her hands, her eyes flitting to the door as if expecting an intruder. And then there was Mr. Edward Finch, the valet whose handsome features were marred by a sullen expression, as if he resented his station. As tea was served, Poirot observed the dynamics. Lady Beatrice spoke with an air of entitlement, dismissing the servants with a wave. Vaughan fidgeted, his eyes darting to a locked cabinet in the corner. Clara whispered to the butler, who nodded curtly before, excusing himself. Harrington himself seemed distracted, his gaze lingering on a portrait of a man in a butler's uniform, a striking figure with a gaunt face and piercing eyes. Poirot's moustache twitched. "A fine portrait, n'est-ce pas?" he remarked. Harrington started. "Oh yes, that's Alfred, the butler who served my grandfather. A loyal man, or so they say. His story is complicated." "Complicated, huh?" Poirot said, sipping his tea. "Perhaps you might share this complication with Poirot, no?" Harrington's face paled. "Tonight, after dinner," he whispered, "there are things you must know. Things about the phantom butler." The conversation shifted to pleasantries, but Poirot's mind was alight. A phantom butler? A missing artifact, perhaps? Or a secret buried in the Manor's history? He noted the tension in the room, the way each guest avoided certain topics, the way their eyes flicked to the shadows. As the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, Poirot felt the familiar thrill of a mystery unfolding. "Les petites cellules grises," he thought, tapping his temple. "They shall have much work to do." Dinner was announced, and as the guests rose, Poirot lingered, his gaze falling on a small, ornate key left carelessly on the sideboard. It was an odd thing, out of place in the grandeur of the room. He slipped it into his pocket, unnoticed, and followed the others, his mind already weaving a tapestry of clues. Whatever shadows haunted Blackwood Manor, Hercule Poirot would bring them into the light. Chapter 2. Arrival at the haunted estate. The Rolls-Royce crunched to a halt on the gravel drive of Blackwood Manor, its tires sinking slightly into the damp earth as the fog thickened around it. Hercule Poirot stepped out, his polished shoes gleaming despite the dreary Sussex afternoon, and surveyed the estate with a discerning eye. The manor loomed like a relic of a bygone era, its Gothic spires piercing the mist, its stone facade weathered by time and secrets. Ivy clung to the walls like a shroud, and the air carried a chill that seemed to whisper of forgotten tragedies. Poirot adjusted his overcoat, his silver-topped cane tapping the ground as he noted the eerie stillness. No birds sang, no breeze stirred the skeletal trees. "C'est une maison de mystère," he murmured, his moustache twitching with anticipation. Baxter, the scar-faced driver, gestured toward the grand oak doors, which groaned open as if reluctant to admit visitors. A young maid, her face pale and her apron slightly askew, curtsied nervously. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot," she stammered, her eyes darting to the shadows of the entrance hall. "Lord Harrington is expecting you." Poirot nodded graciously, noting her trembling hands. Fear, he thought, was already a guest in this house. The entrance hall was a cavernous expanse of polished marble and dark wood, lit by a chandelier that flickered as if struggling against the gloom. Portraits of stern-faced Harrington ancestors lined the walls, their eyes following Poirot as he crossed the threshold. A grand staircase spiraled upward, its banister carved with intricate vines that seemed to writhe in the dim light. To the side, a suit of armour stood sentinel, its visor glinting ominously. Poirot's gaze swept the room, cataloguing details. A faded tapestry depicting a hunt, a grandfather clock ticking too loudly, and a faint smell of damp stone. Un décor parfait pour une énigme, he thought, his little grey cells already at work. Lord Harrington appeared at the top of the staircase, his silver hair catching the chandelier's light. "Monsieur Poirot, you've arrived," he called, descending with a forced smile. "I trust your journey was comfortable." His voice was warm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, as if he expected the walls themselves to betray him. "Most comfortable, mon ami," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "But I confess, your letter has left me most curious. This manner, it has un certain caractère, non?" Harrington's smile faltered. "Indeed it does. Come, let me show you to your room before tea. You'll meet the others soon enough." He led Poirot up the staircase, their footsteps echoing in the vast hall. As they climbed, Poirot noted the portraits again, each face more severe than the last except for one, a younger man in a butler's uniform, his expression oddly serene. "That is Alfred," Harrington said, following Poirot's gaze. "The butler I mentioned. His story is part of why you're here." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Vraiment! Then I look forward to hearing it, monsieur." He said no more, but his mind was already turning, piecing together the fragments of this unfolding puzzle. The guest room was opulent yet oppressive, with heavy velvet drapes and a four-poster bed that seemed to belong to a different century. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to dispel the chill. Poirot set his valise down and inspected the room, his fingers brushing the carved mantelpiece, his eyes noting the dust in the corners. "Neglect," he muttered, "even in grandeur, there is neglect." He opened the window, letting in a gust of damp air, and gazed out at the fog-shrouded grounds. Beyond the lawn, a dense forest loomed, its edges swallowed by mist. Somewhere in that mist, he sensed, lay answers. As he unpacked, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The maid from earlier, whose name he learned was Elsie, stood at the door, her hands clasped tightly. "Begging your pardon, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lord Harrington says tea is in 10 minutes, in the drawing-room. But, sir, if I may—" She hesitated, glancing down the corridor. "Speak, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, his tone encouraging but firm. "What troubles you?" Elsie swallowed hard. "It's the manner, sir. It's Not right. Things move, when they shouldn't, and at night there's noises, footsteps like someone's walking the halls. They say it's the phantom butler, sir, Alfred. He was accused of terrible things, and then he was gone. But he's not gone, not really." Her eyes were wide, her voice trembling with conviction. Poirot's expression remained calm, but his mind was alight. "Un fantôme, you say? Interessant. And these footsteps, you have heard them yourself?" Elsie nodded vigorously. "Last night, sir, near the old servants' quarters. I swear it was him, in his black coat, just watching." She shuddered. "Be careful, sir. This place isn't what it seems." "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said, dismissing her gently. "I shall keep my eyes open." As she scurried away, he tapped his cane against the floor, a habit when deep in thought. A phantom butler, footsteps in the night, a nervous household. Blackwood Manor was proving to be a stage worthy of a grand mystery. At the drawing-room, Poirot found the other guests already assembled, their voices hushed, as if the manor itself demanded silence. Lady Beatrice, the heiress, lounged on a chaise, her pearls glinting as she fanned herself with a lace handkerchief. Charles Vaughan, the solicitor, stood by the locked cabinet Poirot had noted earlier, his fingers twitching as if longing to open it. Clara Henshaw, the housekeeper, poured tea with mechanical precision, her eyes avoiding contact. Edward Finch, the valet, stood by the door, his sullen demeanour unchanged. Harrington introduced Poirot with a strained cheerfulness, and the group exchanged polite greetings, though Poirot sensed an undercurrent of tension. As tea was served, the conversation turned to the manor's history. Lady Beatrice, with a theatrical sigh, mentioned the dreadful stories about Alfred, the butler who had served her great-grandfather. "They say he stole a fortune in jewels and killed a footman who caught him," she said, her eyes gleaming with relish. "Then he vanished, never to be seen again, except, of course, by those who claim to see his ghost." Vaughan laughed nervously. "Superstition, surely. Old houses creak, and servants love their tales." Clara's hands shook as she set down the teapot. "It's no tale, Mr. Vaughan. I've seen things, shadows moving where no one should be. And that portrait in the hall, it watches you." Poirot sipped his tea, his eyes darting from face to face. "Fascinant," he said. "A butler accused of theft and murder, yet his ghost lingers. Tell me, Monsieur Harrington, what is your view on this phantom?" Harrington's face tightened. "I'll speak of it after dinner, Monsieur Poirot. For now, let us enjoy the hospitality of Blackwood Manor." His tone was final, but Poirot noted the way his hand gripped the arm of his chair. As the group dispersed to prepare for dinner, Poirot lingered, his gaze falling on the locked cabinet. It was oak, intricately carved and secured with a heavy padlock. He made a mental note to investigate further. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, and a distant howl, perhaps a dog, perhaps something else, echoed through the grounds. Poirot smiled faintly. "Les ombres du passé," he said to himself. "They are beginning to take shape." Chapter 3. The Legend Unveiled. The dining hall of Blackwood Manor was a spectacle of faded grandeur, its long mahogany table set with gleaming silver and crystal that caught the candlelight like stars in a twilight sky. Hercule Poirot sat at Lord Harrington's right, his posture impeccable, his eyes scanning the assembled guests with the precision of a watchmaker. The room was heavy with the scent of roasted pheasant and aged wine, but an undercurrent of unease lingered, as if the manor itself held its breath. The portraits on the walls, including the ever-present Alfred, the phantom butler, seemed to watch the proceedings with silent judgment. Poirot's moustache twitched as he noted the nervous glances exchanged across the table. Lady Beatrice's sly smirk, Charles Vaughan's fidgeting fingers, Clara Henshaw's tight-lipped silence, and Edward Finch's brooding stare. Lord Harrington, at the head of the table, raised his glass, his voice strained but cordial. "To our distinguished guest, Monsieur Poirot, whose presence honours us," he said, though his eyes darted to the shadowed corners of the room. The toast was echoed half-heartedly, and Poirot inclined his head, his mind already sifting through the evening's subtle clues. Dinner progressed with polite conversation about the weather and London society, but Poirot sensed a reluctance to broach the true reason for his summons. He decided to nudge the narrative forward. "Monsieur Harrington," Poirot said, his voice smooth as the claret in his glass, "you spoke of a matter most delicate in your letter, and this afternoon there was mention of a phantom butler. Perhaps now is the time to share this tale, no?" The room fell silent, the clink of cutlery stilled. Harrington cleared his throat, his fingers tightening around his glass. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot," he said at last. "It's time you knew the story of Alfred, the butler, whose shadow still haunts Blackwood Manor." He leaned forward, his voice low, as if afraid the walls might overhear. "Alfred served my grandfather, Lord Cedric Harrington, some 50 years ago. He was a model servant, loyal, discreet, and meticulous. But in 1875, a scandal erupted. A priceless sapphire brooch, a family heirloom, vanished from my grandmother's chambers. Alfred was accused, though he swore his innocence. Then, a footman who claimed to have seen Alfred with the brooch was found dead in the stables, his throat cut. The blame fell on Alfred, but before he could be arrested, he disappeared into the night. No trace of him or the brooch was ever found." Lady Beatrice, swirling her wine, interjected with a theatrical shiver. "They say his ghost still wanders the halls, seeking justice or revenge. Servants claim to see him in his black coat, carrying a silver tray, as if still performing his duties." Clara Henshaw, the housekeeper, crossed herself. "It's true, sir," she whispered. "I've heard his footsteps, always at midnight, near the old servants' quarters. And last week, a candlestick moved on its own in the library. I swear it." Charles Vaughan, the solicitor, scoffed, though his laugh was strained. "Ghosts? Surely it's just the wind and old pipes. This manor is ancient, after all." Edward Finch, the valet, spoke for the first time, his voice low and bitter. "Ancient or not, something's not right here. I've seen shadows move where no one stands. If it's not Alfred's ghost, then what is it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind cataloguing their reactions. Fear, skepticism, resentment. Each guest revealed a piece of the puzzle. "Interessant," he said, sipping his wine. "A butler accused of theft and murder, vanished without a trace, yet his presence lingers. Tell me, Monsieur Harrington, why does this legend resurface now? Is there a new eventment that stirs these old shadows?" Harrington hesitated, his gaze flickering to the portrait of Alfred, whose painted eyes seemed to pierce the gloom. "There have been incidents," he admitted, "objects moving, footsteps in the night, and whispers of sightings. But more than that, there's a sense of foreboding. I fear something sinister is afoot, Monsieur Poirot, something tied to Alfred's fate." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And these incidents, they began when?" 3 weeks ago, Harrington said, "just after I announced plans to sell part of the estate to settle old debts. Not everyone was pleased." He glanced at Lady Beatrice, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The conversation shifted. but Poirot's attention remained fixed on the dynamics at play. Lady Beatrice's casual dismissal of the estate's financial troubles suggested a motive. Perhaps she stood to lose her inheritance. Vaughan's nervous glances at the locked cabinet in the drawing-room hinted at secrets he guarded. Clara's fear seemed genuine, but was it of a ghost or something more tangible? And Finch's bitterness, did it stem from his low station or a deeper grudge? Poirot's little grey cells hummed with possibilities. As dessert was served, a delicate lemon soufflé, Poirot steered the conversation back to Alfred. This butler, Alfred, he was trusted, oui, yet accused of such grave crimes. Were there witnesses to his supposed misdeeds, or was it all circumstantial? Harrington frowned. The footman, Thomas, was the only witness, and he died before he could testify. My grandfather believed Alfred guilty, but my grandmother, which she always maintained his innocence. She said Alfred was framed, though she could never prove it. Framed, huh? Poirot's moustache twitched. A most convenient accusation when a man vanishes. And this brooch, it was never recovered? Never, Harrington said. It's said to be cursed, a relic from a colonial expedition. Some believe Alfred's ghost guards it still. The meal concluded, and the guests retired to the drawing-room for coffee. Poirot lingered at the table, his gaze fixed on Alfred's portrait. The butler's painted face was gaunt, his eyes sharp with an intensity that seemed almost alive. Poirot approached the portrait, noting a faint inscription at the base. Alfred Grayson, 1860-1875, loyal servant. Loyal, yet betrayed, Poirot murmured. What truth do you hide, mon ami? As he joined the others, he overheard Clara whispering to Elsie, the maid, in the corridor. It's getting worse, Clara said. Last night I saw him again, by the library. He was holding something, a glint of blue like the brooch. Elsie gasped, and Poirot made a mental note to inspect the library later. In the drawing-room, the fire crackled, casting long shadows. Poirot accepted a cup of coffee from Clara, his eyes never leaving the guests. Lady Beatrice was regaling Vaughan with tales of her travels, but her laughter felt forced. Finch stood by the window staring into the fog, while Harrington paced near the locked cabinet. Poirot's fingers brushed the small key he had pocketed the previous day, still tucked in his waistcoat. He suspected it might fit that cabinet, a clue to be explored. As the evening drew to a close, Harrington approached Poirot, his voice low. Monsieur Poirot, meet me in my study at 11. I'll tell you the rest. Things I couldn't say in front of the others. Poirot nodded, his expression serene, but his mind racing. The legend of the Phantom Butler was no mere ghost story. It was a thread woven into a larger tapestry of deceit. As the clock struck 10, Poirot excused himself, claiming a need to rest. Instead, he slipped into the corridor, his cane silent on the thick carpet. The manor was alive with whispers, not of ghosts, but of secrets. He paused by the library door, hearing a faint creak from within. Les ombres du passé, he thought. They are not shadows at all, but footprints of the living. With a smile, he resolved to follow them. Chapter 4. The First Ominous Sign. The morning after the unsettling dinner at Blackwood Manor, Hercule Poirot awoke to a dawn shrouded in mist, the fog pressing against the leaded windows of his guest room like a living thing. He dressed with his usual meticulous care, adjusting his tie and brushing a speck of lint from his lapel, his mind already turning over the threads of the mystery. The cryptic letter, the legend of Alfred the Phantom Butler, and the palpable tension among the household. The air in the manor felt heavier today, as if the walls themselves anticipated trouble. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with purpose as he descended the grand staircase, his silver-topped cane tapping a steady rhythm. In the dining hall, breakfast was laid out with less grandeur than the previous night's dinner. Silver trays of scones, marmalade, and a steaming pot of tea. But the atmosphere was no less strained. Lord Harrington sat at the head of the table, his face pale and drawn, as if he had not slept. Lady Beatrice nibbled a scone with feigned disinterest, while Charles Vaughan, the solicitor, pored over a ledger, his brow furrowed. Clara Henshaw bustled about, her hands trembling as she poured tea, and Edward Finch, the valet, stood silently by the door, his eyes fixed on some unseen point. Poirot noted the absence of conversation. The clink of china was the only sound breaking the silence. "Bonjour, mes amis," Poirot greeted, taking his seat. "I trust you all slept well in this most intriguing manner." His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp, scanning for reactions. Harrington managed a weak smile, while Lady Beatrice rolled her eyes. Vaughan muttered something about old houses, and Clara nearly dropped the teapot. Finch remained impassive, but Poirot caught a flicker of unease in his posture. Before anyone could respond, Elsie, the young maid, burst into the room, her face ashen. "My lord," she gasped, clutching her apron. "It's gone. The sapphire brooch, the one from the study locked in the cabinet. I went to dust this morning, and the cabinet door was ajar, the brooch missing." A collective gasp rose from the table. Harrington stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Impossible!" he barked. "That cabinet is locked, and I have the only key." He patted his waistcoat, then froze, his expression shifting to horror. "The key! It's gone!" Poirot's moustache twitched, his hand brushing the small key he had pocketed 2 days prior, still tucked safely in his waistcoat. He said nothing, but his mind raced. The brooch, the very one tied to Alfred's legend, stolen from a locked cabinet. This was no ghost's doing, but the work of flesh and blood. "Calmez-vous, monsieur," he said soothingly. "Take me to this study. Hercule Poirot shall examine the scene." The study was a dimly lit room off the main hall, its walls lined with the leather-bound books, and a heavy oak desk cluttered with papers. The locked cabinet from the drawing-room was not the focus here. Instead, a smaller, iron-bound cabinet stood against the far wall, its door slightly open, as Elsie had described. Poirot approached, his eyes scanning every detail. The faint scratches around the lock, the dust disturbed on the shelf, and a single muddy footprint on the rug too large to belong to Elsie. "Interessant," he murmured, kneeling to inspect the print. It was fresh, with a distinctive tread pattern, a man's boot perhaps, but not one of a servant's polished shoes. Harrington wrung his hands. "The brooch was priceless, monsieur. Poirot, a family heirloom, the same one Alfred was accused of stealing 50 years ago. It was returned to us years later, found in a pawn shop, but now—" His voice trailed off, his eyes darting to the portrait of Alfred, which hung in this room as well, its gaze seeming to mock the chaos. Poirot turned to Elsie, who hovered nervously by the door. "Mademoiselle, you say you found the cabinet open this morning. Did you touch anything?" "No, sir," Elsie said, shaking her head. "I saw the door ajar and ran straight to tell his lordship. I swear I didn't touch a thing." "Bien," Poirot said, his tone reassuring. "And this footprint? Did you see anyone in the study before you entered?" "No, sir. The house was quiet, but—" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I heard footsteps last night, near the servants' quarters, just like I told you. I thought it was Him? Alfred? The phantom butler, huh? Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his expression remained grave. We shall see, mademoiselle. Leave us now, but stay close. As Elsie scurried away, Poirot turned to Harrington. Monsieur, who else has access to this study? No one, Harrington insisted. It's my private sanctum. The servants clean only when I'm present, and the cabinet key never leaves my person until now. Poirot nodded, filing away the contradiction between Harrington's claim and the key in his own pocket. He examined the cabinet's lock, noting the scratches suggested a clumsy attempt at picking, not the work of a professional thief. Curieux, he muttered, a theft so bold, yet so careless. He requested the household assemble in the drawing-room, and soon the guests and key servants gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. Poirot paced before them, his cane tapping rhythmically. Mesdames et messieurs, a crime has been committed, a brooch, most valuable, stolen from a locked cabinet. But fear not, for Hercule Poirot is here to unravel this mystery. I shall speak with each of you in turn, to understand your movements last night. Lady Beatrice laughed sharply. Really, Monsieur Poirot? You think one of us crept about like a common thief? It's absurd. Absurd, peut-être, Poirot replied, his eyes narrowing. But the truth, it is never absurd. Tell me, madame, where were you between midnight and dawn? Beatrice bristled. In my room, asleep, as any lady would be. I heard nothing, unlike these superstitious servants with their ghost stories. Vaughan, clutching his ledger, spoke next. I was in my room, working late on estate accounts. I heard footsteps around 1 a.m., but I assumed it was a servant. Clara, her voice trembling, admitted to being in the kitchen until midnight, preparing the next day's menu. I heard nothing unusual, she said, though her eyes avoided Poirot's. Finch, the valet, claimed he was in his quarters reading, and heard no footsteps. Each alibi was plausible, yet Poirot sensed gaps, unseen movements in the night. He turned his attention to the servants' quarters, a warren of narrow corridors at the back of the manor. With Harrington's permission, he inspected the area, noting its proximity to the study. A back staircase led directly to the second floor, a perfect route for a stealthy intruder. In a dusty corner, he found another footprint, matching the one in the study, and a scrap of black fabric caught on a splintered doorframe. Aha, he said softly, pocketing the fabric. The phantom butler wears modern cloth, it seems. Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot addressed the group. This theft, it is no work of a ghost, but of a living hand. I ask you all to remain vigilant. The brooch, it is but the first sign of a deeper scheme. Hercule Poirot shall find it, and the truth. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze on the locked cabinet in the drawing-room. The key in his pocket burned with possibility. Was it connected to the studies cabinet, or another secret entirely? Outside, the fog thickened, and a distant creak echoed through the manor. Poirot smiled faintly. Les petites cellules grises, they are never deceived, he thought, ready to follow the trail of footprints, real or spectral, to their source. Chapter 5. Suspects in the Shadows. The afternoon light struggled through the fog, casting a pallid glow over Blackwood Manor as Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his keen eyes surveying the assembled household. The theft of the sapphire brooch had stirred the manor like a stone dropped into a still pond, and the ripples of suspicion now touched every occupant. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and Poirot, with his impeccable suit and gleaming moustache, was the calm centre of the storm. The small key in his waistcoat pocket, the scrap of black fabric from the servants' quarters, and the muddy footprint in the study were threads in a tapestry he was determined to unravel. But first, he needed to understand the players in this drama. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice steady and commanding, "the theft of the brooch is no mere act of greed. It is a sign of deeper motives. I shall speak with each of you privately to learn your truths and perhaps your secrets." His gaze swept over the group. Lord Harrington, pale and anxious. Lady Beatrice, her lips curled in a defiant smirk. Charles Vaughan, clutching his ledger like a shield. Clara Henshaw, wringing her hands. Edward Finch, his sullen eyes fixed on the floor. And Elsie, the maid, hovering nervously at the edge. Poirot began with Lord Harrington, escorting him to the study for privacy. The room still bore the traces of the theft, scratches on the cabinet lock, the faint outline of the muddy footprint. Harrington sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, I swear I don't know how the key was taken. Kept it on me at all times." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Monsieur, you spoke of debts and plans to sell part of the estate. Who stands to lose from this decision?" Harrington hesitated. "Beatrice, primarily. The estate is her inheritance, but the debts, they're substantial. My late brother's mismanagement left us in ruin. Selling the West Wing is the only way to save the rest." "And others?" Poirot pressed. "Who else might resent this?" "Vaughan handles the estate's finances," Harrington said. "He's been evasive lately. And Finch, the valet, has been with the family for years. He's loyal, but bitter. His father was a servant here, dismissed after Alfred's scandal." Poirot nodded, filing away the information. "And this Alfred, the phantom butler, his story stirs unrest. Why now, Han?" Harrington's face darkened. "The servants talk. Clara and Elsie are superstitious, and the theft has fueled their fears. They think Alfred's ghost is angry about the sale." "Merci, monsieur," Poirot said, dismissing him. "Stay close. The truth, it is near." Next, Poirot summoned Lady Beatrice, who sauntered into the study with the air of a queen granting an audience. "Really, Monsieur Poirot," she said, tossing her head, "this is all so tiresome. A stolen trinket and ghost stories? Surely you don't suspect me?" Poirot's smile was polite but sharp. "Madame, a trinket it may be, but its loss threatens your inheritance, no? Tell me, where were you last night?" Beatrice's eyes flashed. "In my room, as I said. I have no need to steal what's rightfully mine. If anyone's to blame, look to the servants. Clara's always skulking about, and Finch has a temper." Poirot noted her quick deflection. "And the estate sale, how does it affect you?" Her lips tightened. "It's a disgrace. Blackwood Manor is my birthright. Uncle Reginald is too weak to manage it properly. If I were in charge—" She trailed off, her fingers brushing her pearls. "Intéressant," Poirot said. "We shall speak again, madame." Charles Vaughan was next, his nervous energy palpable as he sat, his ledger clutched tightly. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm just the solicitor," he said, his voice high. "I handle accounts, not brooches." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "Yet you were seen near the drawing-room's locked cabinet, monsieur. And last night you heard footsteps. Tell me, what do you know of the estate's debts?" Vaughan's face flushed. "They're complicated. Lord Harrington's brother made poor investments. I've been trying to untangle them, but it's slow work. The sale is necessary, but Beatrice opposes it fiercely." "And you, monsieur, do you benefit from this sale?" Poirot asked. Vaughan stammered. I get a commission, yes, but that's standard. I have no reason to steal." Poirot dismissed him, his mind noting Vaughan's evasiveness. "The solicitor knew," More than he admitted, perhaps about the brooch or the key. Clara Henshaw entered, her hands twisting her apron. "I didn't take it, sir," she blurted before Poirot could speak. "I swear on my mother's grave." "Calmez-vous, madame," Poirot said gently. "Tell me of last night. You were in the kitchen until midnight, oui?" "Yes, sir," Clara said, her voice quavering. "I heard nothing, but I've seen him, sir. Alfred, last week in the library, holding a blue glint. I think he's watching us, angry about the brooch." Poirot's moustache twitched. "A ghost with a grudge, huh? Or perhaps a living soul playing a part. Tell me, madame, do you trust the others?" Clara hesitated. "Finch. He's angry, always muttering about his father's dismissal. And Elsie? She's young, impressionable. She believes in the ghost, but I don't know if she's hiding something." Edward Finch was the last, his sullen demeanour unchanged. "I didn't steal anything," he said curtly. "I was in my quarters reading. I don't care about brooches or ghosts." Poirot leaned forward. "Yet you are bitter, monsieur. Your father served here, dismissed after Alfred's scandal. Do you seek justice for him?" Finch's jaw tightened. "My father was wronged, yes. He said Alfred was innocent, framed by someone in the family. But I don't sneak around at night stealing jewels." "D'accord," Poirot said, though his eyes lingered on Finch's calloused hands, capable of picking a lock or leaving a footprint. With the interviews complete, Poirot retreated to the library, seeking solitude to think. The room was vast, its shelves heavy with dusty tomes, and the portrait of Alfred loomed above the fireplace. Poirot examined the spot where Clara claimed to have seen the ghost, finding no trace of a blue glint, but noting a faint scuff mark on the floor, matching the study's footprint. "Pas un fantôme," he murmured, "but a man, with boots and motives." He recalled the scrap of black fabric from the servants' quarters. It was coarse, not the fine cloth of a butler's uniform, suggesting a modern disguise. The muddy footprint, too, was no spectral mark, but a clue to a living culprit. Poirot's thoughts turned to the key in his pocket. He slipped it out, examining it under the library's lamplight. It was small, ornate, and likely fit the drawing-room's cabinet, not the study's. A separate secret, perhaps, but connected to the theft. As evening fell, Poirot joined the household for tea, observing their interactions. Beatrice whispered to Vaughan, her gestures sharp. Clara avoided Finch, who glared at the floor. Harrington paced, his eyes darting to the windows where the fog pressed closer. Poirot sipped his tea, his mind weaving a net. The brooch is but the beginning, he thought. A motive lies hidden, greed, revenge, or something darker. A sudden crash from the hall broke his reverie. Elsie screamed, and the group rushed to find a candlestick toppled on the marble floor, its wax splattered like blood. "It's him!" Elsie cried. "Alfred's ghost!" Poirot knelt, inspecting the candlestick. No dust, no fingerprints, just a deliberate act. He smiled faintly. "Non, mademoiselle, not a ghost, but a message, and Hercule Poirot shall answer it." Chapter 6. Midnight Apparitions. The night at Blackwood Manor descended with an oppressive weight, the fog outside thickening into a shroud that muffled sound and blurred the world beyond the windows. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the growing unease in the household, sat in his guest room. The small key from the drawing-room and the scrap of black fabric laid out on the table before him. The theft of the sapphire brooch, the muddy footprints, and the toppled candlestick were pieces of a puzzle. But the legend of Alfred, the phantom butler, loomed ever larger. The household's fear of a ghostly presence was palpable, and Poirot sensed that tonight would bring new clues or new deceptions. His little grey cells buzzed as he devised a plan to catch the so-called phantom in the act. Dinner had been a tense affair, with Lord Harrington barely touching his food, and Lady Beatrice's barbed remarks cutting through the silence. Charles Vaughan had excused himself early, muttering about accounts, while Clara Henshaw and Edward Finch exchanged wary glances. Elsie's outburst about the candlestick had left everyone on edge, and Poirot had noted how each guest avoided the shadowed corners of the dining hall, as if expecting Alfred's ghost to materialize. Now, as the manor settled into an uneasy quiet, Poirot prepared to test the spectral rumours. He slipped into a dark dressing gown, his movements silent, and tucked his silver-topped cane under his arm. The key and fabric remained in his pocket, alongside a small notebook where he had sketched the footprint's tread pattern. "Ce n'est pas un fantôme," he murmured, "but a clever masquerade. Tonight we shall see who plays the part." He had instructed Elsie to alert him if she heard footsteps again, and he had quietly asked Clara to keep watch near the servants' quarters. To Lord Harrington he had suggested locking the study and drawing-room, a precaution to limit the culprit's movements. At 11:30, a soft knock broke the silence. Elsie stood at Poirot's door, her eyes wide with terror. "Sir, it's happening," she whispered. "Footsteps near the library again. I saw something, a shadow in a black coat, moving toward the west wing." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Bien, mademoiselle. Stay here, lock the door, and do not open it until I return." He moved swiftly, his steps muffled by the thick carpet, and descended the back staircase, which led to the library and the servants' quarters. The manor was a labyrinth of shadows, the flickering gas lamps casting eerie patterns on the walls. Outside, a storm began to brew, thunder rumbling distantly as rain pattered against the windows. In the library, Poirot found the door ajar. He slipped inside, his senses alert. The room was dark, save for a single candle burning on a table, its flame wavering as if disturbed by a draught. The portrait of Alfred loomed above the fireplace, its eyes seeming to follow Poirot's movements. He scanned the room, noting the scuff mark from earlier, now joined by a fresh one, and a faint smear of mud near the bookshelf. "Aha!" he whispered, crouching to examine it. The tread matched the study's footprint, another clue to a living culprit. A sudden creak from the corridor made him freeze. He extinguished the candle and pressed himself against the wall, his cane ready. Through the crack in the door, he saw a figure glide past, a tall silhouette in a black coat, carrying a silver tray that glinted in the dim light. The figure moved with purpose toward the west wing, where the servants' quarters and the old butler's room lay. Poirot followed, his steps silent, his heart steady despite the eerie scene. The west wing was colder, its corridors narrower and less adorned. The storm outside grew louder, lightning illuminating the hall in stark flashes. Poirot trailed the figure to a heavy oak door, which creaked open to reveal a small, dusty room. Alfred's old quarters, untouched since his disappearance. The figure paused, setting the tray on a table, and Poirot caught a glimpse of a pale hand adjusting a cloth over something small and glinting. The sapphire brooch? He couldn't be sure. Before he could act, a scream pierced the night. "Clara!" from the servants' quarters. The figure spun, startled, and fled down the corridor, the tray clattering to the floor. Poirot gave chase, but the storm's roar masked the figure's footsteps, and by the time he reached the main hall, the phantom had vanished. He cursed softly in French, then hurried to find Clara. She was in the kitchen, trembling, with Elsie and Finch at her side. "I saw him," Clara gasped, "in the west wing, just as Elsie said." He was carrying a tray, like in the old stories, and his eyes, they glowed. Poirot raised a hand for calm. Madame, describe him precisely. The coat, the tray, anything else. Clara's voice shook. Tall, in a black butler's coat, like Alfred's in the portrait. The tray was silver, and he moved so quietly, like a ghost. I screamed, and he ran. Finch snorted. Ghosts don't run. It's someone playing tricks, stirring up trouble. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Précisément, monsieur, but who and why? He excused himself, returning to the west wing to retrieve the tray. It was old, tarnished, but real. No spectral illusion. On the table, he found a single glove, coarse and black, matching the fabric scrap he had found earlier. Un déguisement, he murmured, pocketing the glove. Back in the main hall, he gathered the household, now roused by Clara's scream. Harrington looked haggard, Beatrice impatient, Vaughan nervous, and Finch defiant. Mes amis, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the tension. Tonight, the so-called phantom butler has shown himself. But Hercule Poirot declares this. He is no ghost, but a man or woman among us. I have set a trap, and the culprit grows careless. Beatrice laughed sharply. A trap? You're chasing shadows, Monsieur Poirot. This is a waste of time. Vaughan fidgeted. I was in my room, I swear. I heard the scream, nothing else. Harrington clutched his head. This is madness. First the brooch, now this. What's next? Poirot's gaze was steady. What's next, monsieur, is the truth. I ask you all to lock your doors tonight. The phantom will strike again, but Poirot is ready. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, examining the glove under a lamp. It was too large for Clara or Elsie, but could belong to Finch, Vaughan, or even Harrington. The tray suggested a deliberate nod to Alfred's legend, a performance to incite fear or distract from the real crime. Poirot returned to his room, locking the door as instructed, but sleep was far from his mind. He sat by the window, the storm's lightning illuminating his notes. The key, the fabric, the glove, the footprints, they pointed to a living hand orchestrating chaos. A sudden clap of thunder shook the manor, and Poirot's eyes flicked to the window. In the flash, he thought he saw a figure outside, cloaked in black, staring up at his room. But when the next bolt lit the grounds, the figure was gone. Mon Dieu, he whispered, a smile playing on his lips. The game, it grows most intriguing. With the storm raging and the phantom still at large, Poirot knew the night was far from over. Chapter 7. Hidden Passages and Secrets. The storm of the previous night had relented by morning, leaving Blackwood Manor sodden and subdued under a leaden sky. Hercule Poirot, who had barely slept, rose with the precision of habit, his mind a whirlwind of observations from the midnight apparition. The black glove, the silver tray, the muddy footprints, they all pointed to a calculated performance, one designed to evoke the ghost of Alfred and sow chaos. The sapphire brooch remained missing, and the household teetered on the brink of panic. Poirot dressed meticulously, slipping the glove, the fabric scrap and the small key into his pockets, and descended to the breakfast room, where the air was thick with unspoken fears. Lord Harrington looked as if he had aged a decade overnight, his eyes ringed with shadows. Lady Beatrice picked at her toast with disdain, while Charles Vaughan avoided eye contact, burying himself in his ledger. Clara Henshaw served coffee with shaking hands, and Edward Finch stood rigidly by the door, his jaw set. Elsie, the maid, kept glancing nervously at the windows, as if expecting the phantom to reappear in broad daylight. Poirot took his seat, his chaste expression serene. "Bonjour, mes amis," he said brightly. "After such a spectacular night, I trust you all rested well." A murmur of negation rippled through the room. Harrington slammed his fist on the table. "Rested? How can we, with that thing prowling the halls? Monsieur Poirot, you must do something." Poirot raised a hand placatingly. "Patience, monsieur. The phantom, he reveals himself through his mistakes. Today, Hercule Poirot shall explore this manor more thoroughly. There are secrets in these walls, and I intend to find them." After breakfast, Poirot excused himself and began his systematic inspection. He started in the library, where Clara had screamed the night before. The scuff marks on the floor were fresh, and under the bookshelf he discovered a loose panel in the wainscoting. With a gentle push, it swung open, revealing a narrow passageway cloaked in dust and cobwebs. "Aha!" Poirot exclaimed softly, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The passage was cramped, its stone walls damp and echoing with the drip of water. It led westward, toward the servants' quarters and Alfred's old room. Poirot proceeded cautiously, his cane probing the floor for pitfalls. The air grew mustier, carrying the faint scent of mildew and something metallic, ink perhaps. After 20 paces, the passage opened into a small chamber, hidden behind a false wall in what appeared to be a disused pantry. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with forgotten relics, yellowed ledgers, rusted candelabras, and a locked wooden box etched with the Harrington crest. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he examined the box. The lock was simple, and with a hairpin from his pocket he sprang it open. Inside lay a bundle of documents tied with faded ribbon. Poirot untied them carefully, his moustache twitching with excitement. The top sheet was a forgery, a deed dated 1875, transferring ownership of the West Wing from Lord Cedric Harrington to Alfred Grayson in perpetuity. The signature was Cedric's, but the ink had a modern sheen, and the paper, though aged, bore microscopic fibres inconsistent with Victorian stock. "Faux," Poirot murmured. "A clever imitation, but not clever enough for the little grey cells." Deeper in the bundle, he found letters, correspondence between Cedric Harrington and a colonial agent in India, discussing the sapphire brooch's cursed origins. One letter alluded to Alfred's involvement. "The butler knows too much of the brooch's true value. Silence him, or the family's shame will be exposed." Poirot's brow furrowed. Shame? What secret did the brooch hide? At the bottom of the box lay a small, leather-bound diary, its cover embossed with Alfred's initials. Poirot opened it reverently, the pages crackling like whispers from the grave. The entries began in 1874. October 12th, the brooch arrived from India. Lord Cedric swears it is mere sapphire, but I have seen the 8th inscription. Sita's tear, bearer of misfortune. He plans to sell it quietly, to cover gambling debts. November 3rd, the footman Thomas suspects. He saw me examining it. Lord Cedric warned me to silence him. December 15th, disaster! The brooch vanishes from Lady Harrington's chamber. Thomas accuses me. I am innocent. The true thief is the master himself, pawning it for funds. But who will believe a servant? The final entry, dated January 1875. I cannot flee without proof. The hidden passage in the library leads to the pantry safe. There, the forged deed awaits. Cedric's attempt to frame me for embezzlement. Tonight, I confront him. God help me! The diary ended abruptly, smeared with what appeared to be blood. Poirot closed it, his mind racing. Alfred had not stolen the brooch. Lord Cedric had to fund his vices. The footman's murder? likely Cedric's doing, pinned on the loyal butler. Alfred's disappearance was no flight but a silencing, perhaps thrown into the foggy marshes or bricked up in these very passages. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, "the phantom is avenged, but by whom?" The forged documents suggested a modern hand recreating the past, perhaps to blackmail Harrington or sabotage the estate sale. He pocketed a sample of the forged deed and the diary, then continued exploring. The passage branched, one arm leading to the study, explaining the muddy footprint. Another veered toward the drawing room, where the locked cabinet stood. Poirot emerged behind a tapestry, inches from the cabinet. The small key in his pocket fit perfectly. Inside, he found more papers, modern bank statements showing Harrington's debts, and a letter from Vaughan. The sale proceeds will clear the loans, but Beatrice must never know of the forgeries. Vaughan was involved. But why the phantom guise? As Poirot relocked the cabinet, voices echoed from the drawing room, Beatrice and Finch arguing heatedly. "You fool!" Beatrice hissed. "If Poirot finds the passages, it's over. The diary proves everything. Grandfather murdered Alfred." Finch's voice was low and venomous. "And you think I care? My father died disgraced because of that lie. We used the ghost to scare Harrington into cancelling the sale. The brooch is our leverage." Poirot froze, his heart pounding. Beatrice and Finch, accomplices. The heiress and the valet united by grudges against the Harrington legacy. Beatrice laughed bitterly. "The brooch is hidden in Alfred's room, under the floorboards. Once Harrington breaks, we expose the diary, claim the estate, and split the fortune." Their footsteps receded, and Poirot slipped back into the passage, his mind ablaze. The phantom was their creation, a tool to manipulate and terrify. But the blood on the diary suggested Alfred's fate was more brutal than framed flight. Murder, concealed for generations. He emerged in the library, dusting himself off, when Harrington burst in. "Monsieur Poirot, have you found anything?" Poirot composed himself. "Oui, monsieur. Secrets, many secrets, but they must wait. Tensions rise, and danger follows." That evening, as the household gathered for dinner, the atmosphere crackled with unease. Beatrice's smile was forced, Finch avoided eyes, Vaughan sweated profusely, and Clara whispered prayers. Harrington announced the estate sale would proceed despite the unpleasantness. Beatrice's fork clattered. "Uncle, you can't. This house is cursed." Suddenly, a chilling wail echoed through the halls, the phantom's cry or a mimicry. Lights flickered, and from the shadows, the black-coated figure appeared at the dining-room door, holding the silver tray aloft. On it, glinting blue, was the sapphire brooch. Gasps filled the room. The figure vanished as quickly as it came, leaving the tray on the threshold. Poirot rose, examining it. The brooch was real, its facets catching the candlelight. "A challenge," he said softly. "The game escalates." As the household panicked, Poirot pocketed a hair from the tray, dark, matching Finch's. The secrets of the passages had unveiled a conspiracy, but the true fate of Alfred demanded justice, and Hercule Poirot would deliver it. Chapter 8. The Poisoned Chalice. The reappearance of the sapphire brooch, placed dramatically on the silver tray by the so-called phantom butler, had plunged Blackwood Manor into a maelstrom of fear and suspicion. Hercule Poirot, standing in the dining-room as the household reeled from the spectral display, felt the weight of the mystery deepening. The dark hair on the tray, the forged deed, Alfred's blood-smeared diary, and the overheard conspiracy between Lady Beatrice and Edward Finch pointed to a calculated plot, not a ghost. Yet the wail that had accompanied the phantom's appearance lingered in his mind, a sound too human, too deliberate. As the storm outside subsided, leaving a damp stillness, Poirot knew the next move in this deadly game was imminent. His little grey cells were poised for action. Dinner had been abandoned in the chaos, and the guests retreated to the drawing-room, where a fire crackled fitfully. Lord Harrington clutched the recovered brooch, his hands trembling as he locked it in the study's cabinet, this time under Poirot's watchful eye. "Monsieur Poirot," he whispered, "this is no prank. Someone wants me dead, or ruined." His voice cracked, betraying a fear that ran deeper than the theft. Poirot's expression was serene, but his eyes burned with focus. "Calmez-vous, monsieur. The brooch is a lure, a distraction. The true motive lies in the shadows of your family's past and present greed. Rest assured, Hercule Poirot shall uncover it." As the evening wore on, the household gathered for drinks to steady their nerves. Clara Henshaw served wine from a crystal decanter, her hands steadier than before, though her eyes darted nervously. Lady Beatrice lounged with forced nonchalance, sipping her glass while casting veiled glances at Finch, who stood by the window, his face a mask of defiance. Charles Vaughan, his ledger abandoned, drank deeply, his fingers twitching. Elsie hovered near the door, whispering to Clara about the phantom's curse. Poirot, nursing a glass of untouched claret, observed them all, the small key, glove, and diary in his pocket like silent witnesses. Lord Harrington raised his glass, his voice strained. "A toast to resolution," he said, glancing at Poirot. "May we end this nightmare?" The others murmured agreement, but as Harrington brought the glass to his lips, Poirot's sharp eyes caught a faint cloudiness in the wine, a subtle sheen, almost invisible. "Arrêtez!" he shouted, lunging forward and knocking the glass from Harrington's hand. It shattered on the floor, the red liquid pooling like blood. The room froze. Harrington gasped, clutching his chest. What is this?" Poirot knelt, sniffing the spilled wine. A faint almond-like odour confirmed his suspicion. "Poison, monsieur," he said gravely. "Arsenic, if I am not mistaken. Someone in this room intended murder." Gasps and accusations erupted. Beatrice pointed at Clara. "She poured the wine. She's been skulking about, talking of ghosts." Clara dropped the decanter, which miraculously didn't break, and sobbed, "I swear I didn't. I filled it from the cellar, same as always." Finch stepped forward, his voice low. "Check the cellar, then. Someone tampered with it." His eyes flicked to Vaughan, who paled. Vaughan stammered, "I was in my room all day. I know nothing of poison." Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Mesdames et messieurs, calm yourselves. The wine was poisoned after it was poured. The decanter is clean. I observed Clara's actions, but the glass—" He examined the shards, noting a faint residue on one fragment. "The poison was applied to Monsieur Harrington's glass alone, a precise act requiring opportunity." He turned to the group, his gaze piercing. "Who approached the sideboard after the wine was poured?" Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Elsie whispered, "I saw Mr. Vaughan near the sideboard, adjusting the glasses." Vaughan's face strained of colour. "I was rearranging them, that's all. I didn't—" "I say," Poirot cut him off. "We shall investigate. For now, no one touches food or drink unless I inspect it first." He instructed Clara to secure the remaining wine, and summoned the household to the study, where he could question them systematically. In the study, Poirot examined the broken glass fragments, now safely collected in a cloth. The almond scent was unmistakable, and a quick test with a silver spoon from his pocket confirmed arsenic, a crude but effective poison. He recalled the forged deed and Alfred's diary, which hinted at a family secret tied to the brooch. Was the poison meant to silence Harrington? before he could sell the estate, exposing that secret? He began with Vaughan, whose nervous demeanour had worsened. "Monsieur Vaughan, you were near the sideboard. You handle the estate's finances. Tell me, what do you gain if Monsieur Harrington dies?" Vaughan's eyes widened. "Nothing. I'm just the solicitor. The debts are crushing, and the sale is my only way to keep my commission. I'd never kill him." "Yet you know of forgeries," Poirot said, his voice soft but sharp. "I found documents in a hidden passage suggesting fraud in the estate's title. What do you know?" Vaughan's hands shook. I found old papers in the library suggesting Cedric Harrington falsified documents to cover debts. I told Beatrice she's desperate to stop the sale, but I didn't poison anyone." Poirot dismissed him, turning to Beatrice. "Madam, you conspire with Finch to scare Monsieur Harrington using the Phantom's guise. Did you escalate to murder?" Beatrice's laugh was brittle. "Murder? Absurd. Yes, Finch and I played the ghost to spook Uncle, hoping he'd cancel the sale. But poison? That's not my style." Finch, when questioned, was defiant. "I dressed as Alfred, left the brooch to stir fear. My father was ruined by the Harringtons' lies. I want justice, not blood." Clara, trembling, admitted to nothing beyond serving the wine, but her fear seemed genuine. Elsie, tearful, swore she only saw Vaughan near the glasses. Poirot's mind churned. The poison was a bold move, unlike the theatrical Phantom Act. 2 plots, perhaps, one to frighten, one to kill. He returned to the drawing-room, where Harrington sat shaken but alive. "Monsieur Poirot, who would do this?" he asked. "Is it tied to Alfred's curse?" "Non, monsieur," Poirot said. "No curse, only human greed and vengeance. The brooch, the phantom, the poison, they are threads of a single web. I am close to the truth." As night deepened, Poirot set a new trap. He instructed Harrington to announce at breakfast that he would open the drawing-room cabinet, where the key in Poirot's pocket fit, to reveal its contents tomorrow. "The culprit will act tonight," Poirot whispered, "and I shall be waiting." He stationed himself in the library, hidden behind a curtain, watching the passage entrance. Hours passed, the manor silent save for the creak of settling beams. Then, at midnight, a shadow moved, a figure in a black coat slipping into the passage. Poirot followed, silent as a spectre, his cane ready. The figure paused at the pantry chamber, retrieving a vial from the wooden box. Poison, no doubt. Lightning flashed, revealing Finch's face. "Monsieur Finch," Poirot called softly, "the game is over." Finch spun, dropping the vial, which Poirot caught deftly. "You frame yourself," Poirot said, "but the poison, was it you alone, or with another?" Finch's defiance crumbled. "Beatrice planned it. She wanted Harrington, dead to claim the estate. I only played the ghost." Poirot nodded, his trap sprung. The poison linked Beatrice to a darker crime, but the diary's blood suggested an older murder, Alfred's. As he escorted Finch to Harrington, the manor seemed to sigh, its secrets unravelling under Poirot's relentless gaze. Chapter 9. Twists of Betrayal. The revelation of Edward Finch's role in the Phantom Butler's charade, coupled with his accusation against Lady Beatrice, had set Blackwood Manor ablaze with tension. Hercule Poirot, standing in the dimly lit pantry chamber where he had caught Finch with the vial of poison, felt the threads of the mystery tightening. The sapphire brooch, the forged deed, Alfred's blood-smeared diary, the muddy footprints, the black glove, and now the attempted poisoning of Lord Harrington, all pointed to a conspiracy rooted in greed and revenge. Yet Poirot sensed an older wound beneath it all, tied to Alfred's fate 50 years ago. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the manor's fogged windows, Poirot prepared to unravel the final layers of deceit. He escorted Finch, subdued and silent, to the drawing-room, where Lord Harrington awaited, his face a mask of shock. Poirot had instructed Clara to summon the household, and soon Lady Beatrice, Charles Vaughan and Clara Henshaw gathered, their expressions ranging from indignation to dread. Elsie hovered by the door, her eyes wide with fear. The air crackled with anticipation, and Poirot, his moustache impeccably groomed despite the late hour, stood at the centre, his silver-topped cane tapping lightly against the floor. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding. "Tonight, Hercule Poirot has caught a culprit in the act, Monsieur Finch, with poison intended for Monsieur Harrington. But this is not the end of our mystery, non. It is but a twist in a tale of betrayal, old and new." Beatrice stood, her pearls glinting as she scoffed. "Finch, a poisoner! This is preposterous, Monsieur Poirot. He's a servant, nothing more." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Madame, your indignation is noted, but your own words betray you. I overheard you and Monsieur Finch plotting to use the phantom butler's guise to frighten Monsieur Harrington. And now, poison. Speak, madame. What is your role?" Beatrice's face paled, but she recovered quickly. "Frighten, yes, to stop the sale of my inheritance. But murder, never. Finch acted alone if he poisoned that glass." Finch's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "Liar! You told me to get the arsenic, Beatrice. You said Harrington's death would secure the estate for you before he could sell it and ruin us both." Harrington gasped, clutching the arm of his chair. "Beatrice, is this true?" Poirot raised a hand. "Un moment, monsieur. Let us examine the evidence. Monsieur Finch, you dressed as Alfred, left the brooch on the tray to incite fear. But the poison, this was a step too far. We? Who supplied it?" Finch hesitated, then pointed at Vaughan. "He did. Vaughan gave me the vial, said it was from the cellar, part of an old stock. He's been skimming funds from the estate for years." Vaughan leapt to his feet, his ledger falling to the floor. "That's a lie. I manage the accounts, yes, but I've stolen nothing. The poison, I know nothing of it." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Calmez-vous, monsieur. I found documents in a hidden passage, forged deeds suggesting fraud by Lord Cedric, and modern bank statements showing discrepancies. Monsieur Vaughan, you knew of these, non? And you feared Monsieur Harrington's sale would expose your indiscretions." Vaughan's shoulders slumped. I adjusted figures to cover shortfalls. The estate was bleeding money, and I thought I could fix it. But I didn't poison anyone. Beatrice pressured me to hide the debts. She wanted control of the estate." Beatrice laughed bitterly. "You're all pathetic, turning on each other. Yes, I wanted the sale stopped, but I didn't need poison. The phantom was enough. Finch's idea, by the way." Poirot turned to Clara, who shrank under his gaze. "Madame Henshaw, you saw the phantom, spoke of a blue glint. Yet you served the wine. Did you know of the poison?" Clara's hands twisted her apron. "No, sir. I swear I only poured the wine from the decanter. I saw the phantom, yes, but I didn't touch the glasses after." Elsie, trembling, nodded. "It's true, sir. I saw Mr. Vaughan near the sideboard, like I said. But Clara's honest. She's terrified of the ghost, like me." Poirot paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. "D'accord. We have a web of motives, Madame Beatrice, to preserve her inheritance, Monsieur Finch, to avenge his father's disgrace, Monsieur Vaughan, to hide his fraud. The phantom was a ruse, but the poison suggests a deeper intent. And then there is Alfred's diary." He produced the leather-bound book, its blood-smeared pages drawing gasps. "This Poirot continued, tells of Alfred's innocence. He did not steal the brooch. Lord Cedric did, to cover gambling debts. The footman Thomas was murdered to silence him, and Alfred, too, met a grim fate, likely at Cedric's hands. The forged deed I found was modern, created to exploit this history. Who among you knew of this? Harrington's voice was hoarse. My grandmother suspected Cedric framed Alfred, but there was no proof. The diary, it changes everything. Poirot nodded. Oui, monsieur. Someone here used Alfred's tragedy to stir chaos, to manipulate you, but the poison, it was not just about the estate, it was personal. He turned to Beatrice, his gaze piercing. Madame, you spoke of the diary with Finch, said it proves everything. You knew of Cedric's crime, oui, and you planned to use it to claim the estate, framing Monsieur Harrington's death as an accident. Beatrice's composure cracked. I found the diary in the library months ago. It proved Cedric's guilt, but I only wanted to scare Uncle, not kill him. Finch went too far. Finch snarled. You promised me half the estate. You said the poison would look like a heart attack. Poirot raised a hand. Assez. The truth emerges, but one piece remains. The blood on the diary, Alfred's. I suspect he was killed in the hidden passage, his body hidden to protect the Harrington name. The Phantom's guise was to resurrect this injustice, but it served your greed. He turned to Vaughan. And you, monsieur, supplied the poison, hoping to escape scrutiny. A fatal mistake. Vaughan collapsed into a chair, sobbing. I didn't mean for anyone to die. Beatrice blackmailed me. She knew about the accounts. Harrington stood, his voice trembling with rage. Beatrice, you would destroy our family for money, and you, Vaughan, betray my trust. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos. Mes amis, the betrayals are many, but the crime is clear. The Phantom was a fiction, the poison real. Yet Alfred's murder demands justice still. He pocketed the diary, his mind racing. The passage might hold Alfred's remains, a final clue to close the past. As the household dispersed, Harrington in shock and Beatrice and Finch under guard, Poirot slipped to the passage entrance. He would search for Alfred's fate, but first he needed to ensure no further crimes occurred. The manor sighed around him. Its secrets laid bare, but one shadow remained, the truth of Alfred's end, waiting to be unearthed. Chapter 10. The Grand Denouement. The morning sun struggled through the fog, casting a pale light over Blackwood Manor. But its warmth did little to dispel the chill of betrayal that hung over the household. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his immaculate suit a stark contrast to the dishevelled state of the guests gathered before him. Lord Harrington sat slumped in an armchair, his face etched with grief and disbelief. Lady Beatrice, her pearls askew, maintained a defiant glare, though her hands trembled. Edward Finch stood rigid, his sullen demeanour replaced by resignation. Charles Vaughan clutched his ledger like a lifeline, his eyes red from sleeplessness. Clara Henshaw and Elsie hovered near the door, their fear now mixed with awe at Poirot's presence. The sapphire brooch, the forged deed, Alfred's blood-smeared diary, the black glove, and the poisoned wine all had led to this moment, where Poirot would unveil the truth with his signature flair. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding, we have journeyed through a maze of deception, where the ghost of Alfred, the phantom butler, was but a shadow cast by living hands. Today, Hercule Poirot shall reveal the truth, using only les petites cellules grises, the little grey cells. His moustache twitched as he paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. He held up Alfred's diary, its leather cover, worn but intact. This, mes amis, is the heart of our mystery. 50 years ago, Alfred Grayson, loyal butler, was framed for the theft of a sapphire brooch, Cedar's tear, by Lord Cedric Harrington, who pawned it to cover gambling debts. The footman Thomas, who suspected, was murdered, and Alfred, knowing too much, met a tragic end. His diary, smeared with his blood, tells of a confrontation in the hidden passage where I believe he was killed and concealed to protect the Harrington name. Harrington gasped, his hands gripping the chair. "My grandfather! A murderer! It can't be!" Poirot nodded gravely. "Oui, monsieur. The forged deed I found, dated 1875 but crafted recently, was meant to exploit this secret, to manipulate you. But let us turn to the present crimes, the theft of the brooch, the phantom's appearances, and the poisoned wine." He faced Beatrice, his gaze piercing. "Madame Beatrice, you discovered Alfred's diary in the library, no? You saw its proof of Cedric's guilt, a scandal that could ruin the Harrington legacy. You conspired with Monsieur Finch to stage the phantom butler, hoping to terrify Monsieur Harrington into halting the estate sale, preserving your inheritance." Beatrice's lips curled. "I admit the ghost trick, Monsieur Poirot. Finch, dressed as Alfred, left the brooch to scare Uncle. But murder? That's absurd." Poirot turned to Finch. "Monsieur Finch, your father was dismissed after Alfred's scandal, branded a thief's ally. Your bitterness drove you to aid Madame Beatrice, but you went further. You placed the poison in Monsieur Harrington's glass, supplied by Monsieur Vaughan, who feared exposure of his financial fraud." Finch's jaw tightened. "Beatrice pushed me to it. She said a heart attack would solve everything. I only wanted justice for my father." Vaughan leapt up, his voice shrill. "I gave Finch the arsenic, yes, but only because Beatrice blackmailed me. She knew I'd skimmed funds to cover the estate's debts. I didn't want Harrington dead." Poirot raised a hand. "Assez. The poison was a clumsy act, meant to look natural, but it betrayed you all. Madame Beatrice, you orchestrated the fear. Monsieur Finch, you executed the phantom's guise. Monsieur Vaughan, you supplied the means. But the brooch's theft, this was the spark." He produced the small key from his pocket. This key, found in the drawing room, opened the cabinet where Monsieur Vaughan hid documents proving his fraud. The brooch was stolen not for its value, but to distract from these papers. Monsieur Vaughan, you took it, oui? To shift suspicion to the phantom. Vaughan's shoulders slumped. "Yes, I took it from the study, staged the open cabinet. I thought it would buy time to fix the accounts." Poirot nodded. "And so the phantom was born, a fiction to mask greed and revenge. But the true crime is older. Last night, I searched the hidden passage again." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "In the pantry chamber, beneath a loose stone, I found human remains, a skeleton with a cracked skull, wrapped in a butler's coat. Alfred Grayson, murdered by Lord Cedric and hidden for 50 years. Clara gasped, crossing herself. Elsie whimpered, and Harrington buried his face in his hands. "My family, cursed by this," he whispered. "Non, monsieur," Poirot said gently. "Not cursed, but burdened by truth. Alfred's death was concealed to protect the Harrington name, but it fueled this modern conspiracy. Madame Beatrice, you sought to exploit it. Monsieur Finch, to avenge it. Monsieur Vaughan, to escape it. The phantom was your creation, but Alfred's ghost demanded justice." He turned to Harrington. "Monsieur, the estate sale may proceed, but the truth of your grandfather's crime must be acknowledged. The brooch, Cedar's tear, carries no curse, only the weight of human sin. Return it to its rightful origins, perhaps to India, to cleanse this wound." Beatrice stood, her defiance crumbling. I only wanted what was mine. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Finch nodded, his voice low. "I wanted my father's name cleared. The poison it was wrong." Vaughan sobbed, "I'm ruined. I only wanted to save the estate." Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone was firm. "You will face justice, all of you. Monsieur Harrington, summon the authorities. The law shall decide your fates, but Alfred's truth is restored." As Harrington left to make the call, Poirot addressed Clara and Elsie. "Mesdames, fear no more ghosts. The manor is cleansed of its shadows." Clara nodded tearfully, and Elsie managed a small smile. Poirot stepped to the window, gazing at the fog as it began to lift. The manor seemed lighter, its oppressive air dissipating. He slipped Alfred's diary into his pocket, a final memento of a loyal servant wronged. "Adieu, Monsieur Grayson," he murmured. "Your justice is served." The household dispersed, the weight of their secrets lifted, but replaced by the burden of consequence. Poirot gathered his valise, his work complete. As he boarded the Rolls-Royce to return to London, he reflected on the human heart, greedy, vengeful, yet capable of redemption. Blackwood Manor faded into the mist, its story closed, but Poirot's little grey cells were already eager for the next mystery.